Right now, you are probably sitting in a room that has a door that locks. You have electricity running through the walls, a clean pair of shoes sitting by the entrance, and a pocket-sized supercomputer resting right next to your hand. If you get hungry, you don't have to fight a leopard for a carcass. You just tap an app and a stranger brings a warm burrito directly to your face. We call this civilization. We look at it and assume it was built by human intelligence. We trace it back to the invention of agriculture, the creation of writing, the development of engineering, and the clean structure of formal laws. We think we smarted our way into the modern world. But here's a question that will absolutely break your brain if you sit quietly with it for 10 minutes. What if all of this, the cities, the architecture, the technology, the entire complicated global network of human cooperation is actually just a byproduct of something else? What if human beings didn't build civilization because we became smart? What if we became smart because our ancestors did something far more dangerous, far more irrational, and far more terrifyingly vulnerable? What if we fell in love? Long before the first city walls were piled up, long before anyone figured out how to scratch symbols into clay tablets to track grain supplies, and long before human language even existed as anything more than a series of guttural grunts and emotional punctuation marks, our ancestors were already running a biological program that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of life on Earth. Let's go back, way back. Before we had fire under control, before we had tools worth bragging about, before we had anything resembling a social contract. About 3.5 million years ago, if you walked through the landscapes of East Africa, you wouldn't find anyone writing love letters or overthinking their text punctuation. Our ancestors weren't even fully human yet. We're talking about Australopithecus, small-brained, short, bipedal apes who spent their days trying very hard not to be digested by prehistoric apex predators. If you looked at their mating habits back then, it wasn't romantic. It was a primate numbers game. Before bipedalism fully kicked in, our evolutionary lineage operated a lot like modern gorillas. You had massive, heavy-skulled males that were nearly twice the size of females, and one dominant alpha silverback who controlled access to every mate in the group through pure, unadulterated physical intimidation. It was an evolutionary system based on raw power, heavy muscle, and constant violent competition. If you were a smaller male, your reproductive strategy was basically to wait for the alpha to get distracted, look for a hidden bush, and hope for the best. But then something shifted. We stood up. As our ancestors transitioned to walking on two legs, a bizarre physical transformation started happening over hundreds of thousands of years. The massive size discrepancy between males and females, what biologists call sexual dimorphism, began to shrink. The males weren't growing into giant, weaponized brutes anymore relative to the females. And that is a massive biological tell that almost everyone skips over. In the animal kingdom, the scale of the size difference between a male and a female is the ultimate cheat code for reading a species mating strategy. Huge size differences mean a harem-based system governed by internal warfare and zero paternal care. But when the sizes start to converge, it means the biology of the species is pivoting. It means the species is moving toward pair bonding, sustained cooperation, shared investment, and fidelity. The moment your ancestors stood up on two legs 3.5 million years ago, they were unwittingly taking the first physical step toward looking another individual in the eyes and deciding that they were irreplaceable. They were laying the anatomical tracks for romance before they even had the brain power to realize what romance was. Now fast forward to about 1.8 million years ago. Enter Homo erectus. This is where the plot of human evolution gets genuinely beautiful, and it happens through an evolutionary mechanism called mate provisioning. It sounds like a dry, clinical phrase you'd find buried in an economics textbook, but it's actually the oldest, most foundational love language in human history. In the archaeological record around this time, scientists started noticing something weird: evidence of systematic food sharing. And we're not just talking about a group of hungry hominids tearing apart a carcass together in a chaotic frenzy. We're talking about evidence of specific males traveling long distances, risking their lives to hunt or forage, and instead of consuming all those precious calories on the spot like every other selfish mammal on the planet, they carried that food back across miles of dangerous territory to give it to a specific female and her offspring. Not the whole tribe. one specific partner. From the cold, calculating perspective of evolutionary biology, this behavior is a massive anomaly. It makes zero sense under one condition unless the male has a high degree of confidence that those children are his genetic investments. Why waste your energy? Why risk getting your skull cracked open by a rival group or ambushed by a prehistoric hyena on the way home just to feed someone else's genetic legacy? This means that nearly 2 million years ago, there was an implicit, unspoken, ungrunted understanding between two individuals, a mutual agreement that whispered, "You are mine and I am yours." You're looking at the prehistoric invention of taking someone out to dinner. Long before language, long before fire, long before we ever figured out how to build a shelter, love expressed itself through a simple, quiet gesture. I went out into a terrifying world, I survived it, and I brought this back for you. It just happened to be a piece of a dead antelope, but the sentiment is completely identical to buying an anniversary gift. But why did our biology force us into this pair bonding loop in the first place? Why couldn't we just stay like the gorillas, playing the field and letting the strongest brute win? The answer is one of the brutal, elegant, and hazardous pieces of math in evolutionary history: the human baby. As our ancestors stood up, our pelvises had to narrow to accommodate efficient bipedal walking and running. At the same time, our brains were starting to expand exponentially. If you're an engineer looking at those two metrics, you immediately notice a catastrophic design flaw. Big brains cannot fit through a narrow bipedal birth canal. If a human baby stayed in the womb long enough to develop a fully cooked brain, the way a baby chimp or a baby deer does, childbirth would have a 100% mortality rate for mothers. So, evolution arrived at a radical compromise. Human babies are born fundamentally unfinished. They're evicted from the womb months before their brains are fully cooked. Because of this, a human newborn is born in a state of near total comical helplessness that would be a source of deep embarrassment to any other mammal on Earth. A baby deer can stand up and run within hours of being born. A baby chimpanzee can physically cling to its mother's fur when she climbs through the canopy within days. A human baby can't even hold its own head up. It can't regulate its own temperature. It's essentially an external fetus that screams, drains resources, and alerts every predator within a 2-mile radius that a defenseless snack is nearby. This creates an evolutionary crisis. A female hominid in a prehistoric savanna trying to forage for calories, defend herself from apex predators, move with the tribe, and care for a completely helpless, heavy infant entirely on her own, faces terrifyingly low survival odds. The math of raising a human child alone is brutal and unforgiving. This is where love stops being a luxury and becomes an absolute, non-negotiable survival mechanism. Humans became what biologists call cooperative breeders. Biparental investment wasn't just a nice lifestyle choice, it was the line between extinction and survival. If you're a female in that high-stakes environment, your checklist for a mate shifts completely. You don't care if a male has the biggest muscles or the loudest chest beat if he's going to run off the second things get difficult. You're looking for something else entirely. You're looking for a male who will stay, a partner who will consistently bring food back, who will stand guard in the crushing existential darkness of the night, who will help carry the heavy baby when the group has to move, and who will protect you when you're at your most physically vulnerable. You aren't just selecting for physical strength, you're selecting for reliability, for loyalty, for commitment. And if you're a male, the evolutionary math flips too. You aren't just trying to scatter your genes as widely as possible through a series of fleeting encounters. You're investing everything into a long-term, high-risk cooperative venture. You want to find one partner with whom you can build a durable, lasting alliance to ensure that the incredibly fragile children carrying your DNA actually survive to adulthood. This is the exact point where human emotions had to evolve past simple lust and primitive attraction. Our neurochemistry had to build a deeper floor, attachment. The brain had to develop a highly specific, almost irrational, intoxicating neurological drive that focused all your attention on one particular person, turning them from an interchangeable member of the species into someone completely, perfectly irreplaceable. And the hardware for this emotional machinery is incredibly ancient. By roughly 300,000 years ago, when the very first anatomically modern Homo sapiens appeared, the neurological architecture of the human brain was already locked in. The limbic system, the emotional engine room responsible for producing fear, pleasure, grief, longing, and attachment, was fully operational. When those ancient humans looked across a flickering fire, their brains were being flooded with the exact same neurochemical cocktail that runs through yours today. They had dopamine lighting up their reward pathways, creating that obsessive electric high of early attraction. They had oxytocin cementing a deep, calm, visceral bond of mutual trust and safety. They had vasopressin driving that fiercely protective, possessive loyalty towards their chosen partner. The hardware was running the exact same software. Long before we had the words to define what we were feeling it with a crushing, vivid intensity. Think about what this means for a second.
If love is the biological engine that forces two completely separate individuals to form an exclusive, long-term cooperative alliance to protect a vulnerable third life, then love is the primary force that broke the default rule of the animal kingdom. The default rule is simple: look out for number one. Love forced us to look out for someone else, and once you learn how to do that for one person, the circle starts to expand. Because human babies are so resource-intensive, even two parents cooperating often wasn't enough. Grandmothers had to step in. Aunts and uncles had to step up. The entire small band of hunter-gatherers had to coordinate their efforts to keep these fragile, big-brained children alive. Love for a partner naturally extended into love for offspring, and love for offspring expanded into a deep protective attachment to the extended family and the community. Suddenly, you aren't just a collection of competing primates sharing a geographic space. You are a tribe. You are an emotional network bound by empathy, shared grief, shared joy, and deep relational accountability. You are building the psychological infrastructure of a society. And then, once that emotional safety net is in place, everything else can start to grow on top of it. Take language, for instance. We assume language is the tool we use to create our relationships, but evolutionary anthropology suggests it might be the exact opposite. You don't need a complex, nuanced vocabulary with deep grammatical structures if your only interactions with other primates are fleeting, competitive, or purely logistics. A few distinct warning cries and basic dominance grunts work perfectly fine for that. But when you're locked into a deep, lifelong pair bond with another human being, when your survival depends entirely on understanding their emotional state, coordinating long-term plans, navigating internal conflicts, and building mutual trust, suddenly the information bandwidth has to increase. You need to communicate nuance. You need to articulate subtle internal feelings. You need to cross the impossible, terrifying distance between two separate minds that desperately want to be understood by each other. Love drove the communication requirements of our species through the roof. Language didn't build love. Love forced language to evolve. The same goes for art, decoration, and human culture. Around 100,000 years ago, humans started doing something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. We started making ourselves look beautiful. Archaeologists find pierced seashells worn as necklaces at ancient sites in North Africa. They find rich red and yellow ochre pigments rubbed onto skin in intricate patterns, and ivory beads painstakingly carved from mammoth tusks. And when you look at these objects, you realize they aren't tools. They don't help you skin an animal faster. They don't protect you from the cold weather. They are social signals. They are a physical declaration that says, "Look at me. Look at the creativity it took to imagine this. Look at the patience it took to craft this beautiful, useless thing. Look at how much care I put on my appearance." It is sexual selection running at full throttle. We decorated our bodies because we wanted to be chosen by the people we loved. And when archaeologists find these exact same specific shell beads at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers of rugged terrain, it means these beautiful tokens weren't just kept, they were traded, passed along networks of human contact across vast, dangerous distances. It means these items held deep relational value. It means 100,000 years ago, an ancient human was handing an object to someone else as a quiet, physical proxy for their affection. It was the prehistoric birth of a universal human truth. I saw this beautiful thing in a wide, lonely world, and the very first thing I did was think of you. We see it in our oldest technologies too. The oldest confirmed musical instruments ever unearthed by modern science are tiny, delicate flutes carved from the wing bones of vultures and the ivory of mammoths discovered in caves across southwestern Germany. They date back over 40,000 years. They are exquisitely made, precisely bored to create specific harmonic intervals and melodic scales. And you have to stop and picture that scene to truly feel the weight of it. It's the height of the last ice age in Europe. Outside the cave, the wind is howling, the temperature is low enough to freeze a human solid in hours, and apex predators are moving through the dark. Inside, around a small circle of firelight, an ancient human is sitting on the dirt, pressing a bone flute to their lips and blowing melody into the cold air. Why? They weren't doing it for survival. They were using sound as an emotional technology. They were playing music to court a mate, to soothe a crying, unfinished child, to bond a terrified group of humans together against the vast, crushing isolation of an empty continent. They were using rhythm to say the things that words hadn't yet grown old enough or sophisticated enough to handle. Every single thing we associate with human civilization, our music, our art, our language, our capacity to live in large, dense communities without tearing each other apart, grew out of that primary, ancient necessity to protect the pair bond. Civilization didn't come first. Love wasn't a luxury we invented after we built cities and had enough free time to worry about our feelings. Love is the tool we use to build the cities in the first place. It is the foundation of the entire structure. So, the next time you find yourself staring blankly at your phone, completely paralyzed by a text message, wondering if a simple piece of punctuation makes you sound too cold, too distant, or too vulnerable, or the next time you feel that heavy, terrifying, weightless freefall that comes with realizing you care about another fragile human being far more than is comfortable to admit, just take a deep breath, look at your hand, take comfort in the fact that you're running an incredibly ancient, beautiful program. You are doing something that has no clean beginning, something so deeply woven into the fabric of our species that it stretches back long before the first tool was ever sparked into life. Every single one of your ancestors, stretching back through millions of ice ages, droughts, shifting continents, and terrifying predators, looked at someone else in the flickering firelight and felt exactly what you were feeling. They were clumsy with it. They handled it messily. They were terrified of rejection, and they made mistakes. But impossibly, beautifully, against all the brutal evolutionary odds of a hostile planet, they figured out how to stay. They held each other in the dark. They brought each other dinner. They played music into the freezing night. They chose commitment over convenience, and they kept that quiet, fragile chain of attachment alive just long enough to pass it down to you. You are not malfunctioning when you fall in love. You are remembering who we are. You are participating in the single most radical survival strategy in the history of life on Earth. And when you think about it, that is the most beautiful thing in the world.